hit that subscribe button. I've got some massive breaking news right now. This is a totally last-minute true crime update I threw together because of what I just confirmed. One single sentence changed everything. Brian Entin stood on the edge of the desert, looking out over the dirt, and dropped a line that sent absolute shockwaves through the whole Nancy Guthrie investigation. Detectives might have missed something massive out there the first time. Right then, everything shifted. For months, we all thought this missing persons case was picked apart from every single angle. Huge teams swept the Tucson desert. Digital forensics were checked and then double-checked. Nancy's final hours were pieced together over and over under massive pressure. The story felt solid until Brian Entin floated the unthinkable. Cops might have been searching the wrong spot the entire time. Now, the hunt is back on in a crazy way. What if the answers never lived inside that house, but out in the dead, quiet desert? Let's walk through these explosive updates, the ignored physical evidence, the totally blown-up timeline, and this growing feeling that early search teams walked right past major clues. Before we get going, drop your theory in the comments down below. Do big police investigations rush and blow past major evidence in those crazy first days? If you want real, high-stakes true crime breakdowns that cut through the noise, hit like and subscribe. It helps me keep this deep dive coverage coming as the story breaks. Here is exactly how this newest bombshell played out. For months, everyone was hyper-focused on what went down inside the Guthrie house. The randomly cut security cameras, the weird motion alerts, and that haunting 41-minute gap detectives could never fully explain. Police dumped all their resources into digital logs, forensic traces, and the yard, sure the real story happened inside those four walls. But going by Brian Entin's newest reports, a quiet, massive shift just happened totally behind closed doors. Detectives are starting to wonder if they missed hard physical proof sitting just past the house, deep in that massive Tucson desert. At first, that sounds crazy. The desert got searched a bunch of times by ground crews, volunteers, dogs, drones, and special units. They called the area clear, dead end on that lead, at least that's what everyone thought. But true crime experts know the ugly truth about massive search grids. No matter how good they look, they are never perfect. Blowing sand, bad weather, awful lighting, and straight-up tunnel vision in those first days can blind top-tier teams. Once fresh parts of the timeline dropped, old clues looked totally different. That is exactly what we are hearing happened here. Cops supposedly went back to movement patterns from the night Nancy went missing, tracking new map data against old drone video. Something felt way off. Tiny weird details in the dirt, stuff that meant zero before suddenly screamed for attention. And that pulled them straight to one spot, a lonely desert trail miles away from the main search grid. On the surface, just a normal spot. Baked dirt, dead brush, basically zero cars. The sort of road you just blow past without thinking twice. But according to inside sources, this dead stretch of sand is now a massive point of interest. Why? Because when detectives tweaked their 3D models and lined them up with Nancy's missing window, invisible details popped right out. Random tire tracks, messed up dirt patches that completely blew up the old theory of a random break-in happening only at the house. The fallout is terrifying. What if Nancy, or whoever grabbed her, went way farther out than the cops ever thought? What if that desert wasn't just a dumping ground but held hard pieces of the actual crime? This crazy pivot is forcing cops to face an ugly truth. Their day one focus might have been way too narrow, too rushed, too sure the answers were right at home. Now they have to admit the real story probably slipped right through their fingers, buried under sand and bad guesses. The desert never forgets, and it might finally spill its secrets. As this whole new angle breaks open, the heat on these detectives is at a boiling point. Every single grid search, every zoomed-in photo, every new timeline piles on the tension. Everyone is watching, her family is waiting, and somewhere out in that endless empty dirt, the missing chunk of Nancy's story might finally be ready to surface. The thought keeping everyone up at night is simple but completely terrifying. Just how much did they miss the first time? And what are they going to find now that they are actually looking? Keep it locked right here. The desert is talking, and this mystery is far from done. There is more than just sand out there. Police still haven't told the public what those weird details actually were. But the fact they are heading back to that empty wasteland speaks volumes. Experts watching the case say this spot lines up way too perfectly with the fresh tracking data from the night Nancy disappeared. What looked like nothing before is suddenly everything, and that one fact has completely rattled the investigation. It hints at something awful. Those day one guesses about how fast and far Nancy was taken might have been totally, dangerously wrong. Brian Entin didn't just point to an empty patch of sand. He exposed deep cracks in the search itself. Now, one of the most chilling details involves the critical first 72 hours after Nancy vanished. Those golden hours when every second matters. Reports say detectives are checking if major coordination failures during that early chaos left huge chunks of land totally undersearched, especially those remote desert zones. Back then, the working theory stayed locked on the immediate area around the Guthrie family home. The house, the yard, the nearby roads, everything pointed inward. But as updated timelines rolled in, detectives reportedly realized their early focus was way too narrow. It blinded them to what was happening just a few miles deeper into the desert. Look, no one's claiming they made mistakes on purpose. Those first few days of any major missing person case. Pure organized chaos. You've got limited resources, bad intel, and crushing urgency. But sources say certain assumptions definitely boxed in how far the search teams actually looked. Locations that didn't fit the main narrative got quietly pushed aside. Now, those early decisions are back under the microscope. Another huge piece detectives are supposedly looking at again? Vehicle movement. They are checking if unknown cars were driving down those secondary dirt access roads right around the exact time Nancy vanished. Old traffic data, witness accounts, and timeline models are all getting a second look. And here is the truly unnerving part. A few witnesses reportedly spotted suspicious activity way farther from the neighborhood than detectives originally thought mattered. At first, those tips were completely brushed off as too vague or unreliable. But now, with fresh timeline data, those exact same sightings are suddenly locking into place with terrifying precision. What they dismissed early on is now impossible to ignore. That is exactly why Brian Entin's reporting hit such a raw nerve online. He didn't just drop new facts. He said what insiders had been whispering about for months. The terrifying thought that the biggest clues in Nancy's case were never actually hidden. They were just completely overlooked. The desert didn't bury the truth on purpose. It just waited. While the team chased ghosts inside that house, the real story was probably written in tire tracks and disturbed dirt miles away. Every new layer the police peel back raises the exact same haunting question. Just how much did they miss because they were staring in the wrong direction? The ground is totally shifting under this case right now. What started as a hunt for a missing girl has turned into a brutal reckoning with their own blind spots. Somewhere out in that massive, silent desert, the real answers might still be sitting there untouched, waiting, and finally within reach. The clock is absolutely screaming now. The desert isn't empty anymore. It is watching, and it is finally ready to show us what it saw that night. The sand wasn't done talking. What the detectives are quietly admitting right now is way more disturbing than one big clue. This new push into the desert isn't about some sudden miracle breakthrough cracking the case wide open. It's about a slow, creeping dread. The realization that the actual truth was probably staring them in the face the whole time, hiding in plain sight, buried under bad assumptions and completely blown chances. The Nancy Guthrie missing person case just entered a much darker, scarier phase. The spotlight isn't just glued to whatever happened inside that house anymore. Detectives have to face a terrifying thought. Massive chunks of the timeline probably played out miles beyond that original search grid, way out in the Badlands. And if you're following Brian Entin's reporting, you know this shift changes literally everything. Early on, the cops ran with a strong assumption that Nancy's disappearance was hyperlocal, just around the family property. That belief drove every single call. They dumped everything into the immediate area. Roads near the house, the close desert edges, and drainage pipes within easy reach. But what if the suspect actually knew the terrain? What if they moved way farther and faster than anyone guessed? That question haunts the whole investigation today. One of the first things detectives reportedly went back to were the secondary dirt roads west of the main Tucson grid. A lot of those paths barely even showed up on early satellite maps. Some were so dead that they basically got ignored during the first massive sweeps. To a normal person, they looked completely useless. But out in the desert, forgotten trails are the most dangerous. Crime experts say those remote backroads let a suspect slip away without drawing any attention. Once detectives compared car timing estimates with their updated reconstruction of Nancy's disappearance timeline, specific dirt routes suddenly looked incredibly suspicious. And while no exact car is publicly confirmed, sources say the police are taking a serious look at escape routes they completely brushed off before. Those early assumptions about how far and fast someone drove that night, they are totally crumbling. Then, there is the massive issue of visibility, something that should have been obvious, but is only right now being seriously reconsidered. Blinding Arizona sun, kicking dust, jagged rocks, and basically zero visibility at night. All those harsh factors make tiny clues almost impossible to actually spot during those massive, high-speed searches. What looked like empty dirt during that first frantic week might look entirely different when checked slowly, up close, and with fresh eyes. Detectives are reportedly waking up to the fact that crucial evidence wasn't ignored on purpose. The unforgiving desert and the sheer chaos of those first few hours just completely swallowed it up. Then there's the timeline, that notorious 41-minute window investigators still haven't been able to fully explain. Detectives are laser-focused on travel estimates tied straight to those missing minutes. Just how far could a car actually get in that exact time frame? Which escape routes make sense? Could spots they originally thought were too far away actually fit this new timeline? Every new clue drags this case deeper into the desert. And it's not just about searching more land. It means facing the fact that their initial theory could have been completely wrong from day one. Assuming everything went down close to the house might have blinded them to the real crime scene. The desert doesn't rush. It doesn't panic. It just sits there, waiting. And right now, it might be hiding the final pieces of Nancy's last hours. With this new chapter opening, the pressure is at a boiling point. The public wants real answers. Nancy's family is still begging for the truth. Out there on those dead desert highways, buried under the blowing sand, detectives might finally be zeroing in on what actually happened that night. The question keeping everyone up at night is bone-chilling. Just how much of the truth did that desert swallow up, and what is it finally about to spit back out? This search is far from over. They're only just starting to look in the right place. The desert kept its secrets, and the early timeline lied. What detectives are uncovering now is way more disturbing than anyone ever saw coming. Early on, practically the whole case hinged on one single belief. They assumed Nancy couldn't have been taken very far during that tiny 41-minute window. But fresh reconstruction models just blew that theory right apart. Now, it looks like a much wider escape route wasn't just possible, it was highly probable. That one massive realization is forcing investigators to dig through old witness statements with a fresh perspective. A totally ignored tip mentioned a sketchy late-night vehicle moving way out past the original search perimeter. Back then, they brushed it off as too vague and unreliable. But today, with this new timeline, that exact same testimony clicks into place with terrifying precision. Detectives aren't just combing through the sand anymore. They're second-guessing every single thing they thought they knew. Even with this fresh angle, one huge problem is standing in the way. There's still zero confirmed physical evidence tying any specific suspect to these remote desert spots. No forensic smoking gun, no decent security footage, not a single eyewitness who can put a face to a name out there. It's a brutal reality for these detectives. Solid theories are great, but hard evidence is what gets convictions. The Arizona desert asks dark questions, but it hasn't coughed up any definitive answers. What's really telling is how certain individuals reacted once Brian Entin's reporting shined a spotlight right back on these ignored stretches of desert. Word is, police are watching closely. Who suddenly got rattled? Who rushed to rewrite their old statements? And who started obsessively posting about the search details online? Some of it is pure paranoia. Other reactions are just genuine, raw grief. But experts say, a handful of reactions are throwing up massive red flags. They line up just a little too perfectly with those growing gaps in the timeline. How someone acts when the heat turns back on can speak louder than evidence. As things unfold, one hard truth is getting impossible to ignore. This fresh desert grid search isn't going to produce a magical clue that solves everything instantly. It's a brutal realization that early assumptions about timing and distance totally handcuffed this investigation from day one. Brian Entin's ground reporting has basically forced that reckoning. But the darkest, most uncomfortable question is still hanging in the air. If these desert spots mattered all along, why did it take detectives this long to notice? The answer is tunnel vision. From day one, police were convinced the best evidence was sitting right by the Guthrie property. That one guess dictated exactly where the search teams went, who they took seriously, and what clues they brushed off. A late-night car on a dirt road, weird movement near those secondary desert access points. It didn't fit their neat little story, so it got ignored. Now, those exact same details are coming back to haunt the whole investigation. Right now, the biggest thing under the microscope is travel time. Specifically, that weird 41-minute missing window. Early theories insisted Nancy couldn't have been taken far. But fresh math proves that, under the right conditions, a suspect could have driven way further than anyone ever thought possible. If that's true, whole areas they crossed off the map are suddenly wide open again. The desert never changed, but our grasp on that night definitely did. With every fresh timeline, this case gets dragged deeper into the dunes, pointing to a truth hiding in plain sight from the jump. The pressure is skyrocketing, the questions just keep multiplying, and that massive, silent, brutal desert might finally be ready to show us just how wrong those first theories actually were. What else did the cops miss out there? And how much further does this rabbit hole go? The desert was trying to talk this whole time, realizing that 41-minute gap allowed for way more miles than originally guessed, forced the police to rip up their old maps entirely. The timeline they treated like gospel suddenly looks totally broken, and the more they dig into it, the more the foundation of this entire missing person case starts to crack. Brian Entin focused heavily on how brutal the terrain is. These newly searched zones are packed with blind dips, dry washes, and thick brush that can easily swallow small clues whole. Out in the Arizona desert, the wind and blowing sand don't just cover up clues, they literally erase them over time. Experts warn that harsh weather can make even the most thorough grid searches useless if teams rush it. Those early crews were racing the clock. Pressure was off the charts. Information was full of holes. But now detectives have to admit the truth. Some spots needed a much closer, slower look than they got during those frantic first days. That wasn't necessarily negligence. It was just the brutal, unforgiving reality of a desert manhunt. Then came a much darker angle, knowing the terrain. Detectives reportedly started asking if a suspect tied to the case understood those remote desert trails way better than a normal person would. A few of the back trails they are rechecking are practically invisible unless you know they are there. No street signs, no clear markers. They fade right into the harsh landscape. If the killer really knew that rough terrain, it totally explains how they slipped through the area while staying completely off the radar. A local geographic edge might have been the ultimate silent weapon that night. Even with all this fresh energy, one cold fact still haunts the case. There is still zero confirmed public breakthrough. No smoking gun forensic evidence, no clear security footage, and no witness who can firmly place a suspect out in that desert. The desert opens up terrifying theories, but it hasn't handed over any hard facts yet. And in a high-profile true crime case like this, suspicion without solid proof is a dangerous game. Brian Entin's reporting entirely flipped the public's understanding. For months, everyone was just focused on what happened inside the Guthrie house. Now the lens has zoomed way out. People are finally realizing this mystery might be geographically way bigger and much colder than we were initially told. That shift puts massive new pressure on law enforcement to explain why specific zones were ignored so fast. Public scrutiny is literally forcing internal reviews. Past choices are being judged under a brutal new light. As this third chapter wraps up, one thing is painfully obvious. The desert clues matter, not because they gave us a quick fix, but because they proved how long detectives might have been working off bad assumptions about travel routes, about search borders, and about how far the truth actually traveled that night. But the absolute creepiest question is just now bubbling to the surface. What if the crucial evidence was never really hidden? What if it was sitting right in plain sight all along, while everyone was just staring the wrong way? The further detectives dig, the more they have to face a really uncomfortable truth. Their early hunch that everything went down right near the house might have totally blinded them. The glitched cameras, the motion alarms, those missing 41 minutes, it all dragged their attention inward. Meanwhile, the real tragedy might have played out miles deeper into the dead desert. That tunnel vision controlled everything, where teams searched, who got believed, and exactly which clues were tossed aside. The desert doesn't lie, but it definitely does not forgive tunnel vision. Right now, it's forcing the whole investigation to swallow a heavy truth. Sometimes the biggest mistake isn't dropping the ball on evidence. It's convincing yourself you already know exactly where to look. This search isn't just about Nancy anymore. It is about whether the real story was ignored because nobody was willing to look far enough. And the desert is still out there waiting. People searched the desert, sure, but they didn't really see it. As detectives dug in, they found a disturbing truth about those massive sweeps: volunteer crews, local cops, and special units. And follow-up crews had all walked chunks of that land at different points. On paper, it looked rock solid. In reality, not even close. Experts who know these complex desert rescues bring up a brutal fact. Doing it twice doesn't mean doing it right. Some teams rushed, just scanning the wide-open flats. Others stuck strictly to the easy, high-visibility spots. Priorities kept shifting based on whatever theory was hot that day. When detectives finally checked the paperwork for certain remote paths and dry washes, they reportedly found out some spots just got a quick glance from a distance. Someone walked past, but nobody really looked. That realization hit like a truck. Brian Entin also pointed out the heavy emotional weight crushing those investigators during those crucial first days. Once Nancy's disappearance blew up in the public eye, the media frenzy spiked. The community started demanding answers, and the pressure became absolutely suffocating. In a high-stakes circus like that, experts say cops often get shoved toward fast conclusions way before the full picture actually comes together. Not because they were being lazy, but because they had to move fast on half-baked intel. That intense pressure allegedly caused several early witness tips to get tossed out too fast, just because they didn't match the leading theory of the week. Now, those exact same witness statements are getting a fresh look under a totally different lens. The new timeline models completely flipped the script. What detectives once thought was a super tight travel window is actually looking pretty wide open. Someone who knew that rough terrain could have traveled way farther than anyone guessed during that 41-minute blackout. Hidden access paths once written off are now under a massive new microscope. Those early geographic assumptions just don't hold water anymore. But even with all this fresh momentum, they're hitting the exact same wall. Even with everyone staring at the desert, we still lack solid public proof. There is zero forensic evidence that ties this whole new theory together cleanly. No hard proof showing exactly who drove down those back trails. Suspicion is building. Timelines are shifting fast, but solid proof stays painfully out of reach. That is the brutal reality investigators are still stuck with. They might finally know what went down, but actually proving it? That's a whole different fight. Then there's the deeply unsettling question about Annie's actual role. Detectives are reportedly still digging into her tight bond with Nancy, seeing if her insider knowledge of schedules and hidden drama matches up with these new timelines. Police aren't publicly calling her a suspect, but insiders claim too many weird details keep pointing right back to that bad blood. The physical map and the personal drama are bleeding into one disturbing picture. As this fourth chapter comes to a close, one thing screams out. The investigation didn't suddenly shift because of some explosive new clue. It shifted because detectives finally admitted their original theory was way too small. It simply couldn't explain the brutal reality of that terrifying night. Brian Entin's reporting dragged the spotlight onto forgotten search grids, blind spots, and dead ends that cops completely brushed off in the early chaos. But the heaviest question is still staring us down. What dark truth have investigators actually pieced together behind those locked doors? After years of grid searches, timeline building, and deep analysis, why is the Nancy Guthrie case still a ghost? The desert knows. And it's finally running out of places to hide.